So good morning, everybody. Good morning, people who are plugging in. Ann, Estella, Mom, Pat. Anybody else that's there? Look like a couple more people are there. Phyllis. Good morning, everybody. Patrice. So Pat, I'm glad to hear Kobe's a little better. Tough time. So I was holding up my old. Well, it wasn't mine, but I'm pretty sure when I was a little kid, I had an old Speed Racer lunchbox. Actually, I got to look for my notes. I have somewhere I have my notes about what I was going to talk about this morning. And good morning, Kathy. And there, got them. So my old Speed Racer lunchbox. So it's back to school time, and it's such a bummer. In some ways, more than a bummer. It's distressing. Because back to school time used to be such an exciting time, at least for young kids and their moms. Patrice went home for lunch. Phyllis never had lunch boxes. Man, you guys missed out. How'd you go home for lunch? Even back in like elementary school, I remember when we got older, we could do stuff for lunch. But yeah, back in elementary school, I just remember everybody, the earliest grades, we would all buy our lunch boxes. And I don't remember, I had this vague memory of having a Speed Racer lunchbox, something like that. That is not mine. If it was, I'd sell it on eBay and make $10. But it's such a distressing thing. Hi, Rox. Yes, Rox, you remember it. You remember picking out lunch boxes. The Partridge Family. I remember the Partridge. We're dating ourselves, Rox. Partridge Family. The Brady Bunch, Speed Racer. I used to love to come home from school when I was a little kid and turn on the Speed Racer show. I love Speed Racer. So it's a bummer for parents right now, because I think that excitement, that, picking out your backpack and picking out your new lunchbox and getting some new school clothing, I think all of that is really outweighed. So you went home too, Ann, walked home. Anybody else besides me and Rox remember buying a lunchbox when you were a little kid? I had no idea, Phyllis, that they let people walk home from school, Phyllis and Patrice. You had no cafeteria back in the day. Man, that must have been back in the dark ages. Anyway, so such a bummer because, obviously with what's going on with COVID, et cetera, there's, I'm not that different age-wise from you, Pat. I went to Muhlenberg Elementary, and I know that I don't remember kindergarten. I have no memories of kindergarten because in those days we lived in Reedsville, and I have just very, very fuzzy memories of kindergarten. And then we moved and came to Allentown, and I remember first grade really well. My son Scott has the same issue. Scott moved from East Greenville after kindergarten. He went to kindergarten at East Greenville. And then we moved to Allentown, and Scott started first grade here at UT, and he has the same issue I did because of, there's no school buses either. Man, Phyllis, my goodness. Pat, I'm the same age as your son. My next birthday is 60. Just hard to believe. Anyway, to our subject, the whole school thing. I've been doing two things. One, we've been talking a lot about this whole thing of attachment and love, et cetera. And I've been having a blast reading about our brains and attachment. And some of this I'm going to talk about on Sunday. But then practically speaking, what this looks like, what happens to our brains when we're young. Been talking to several moms. I've been talking to a couple moms who are in the process of sending kids back to school, especially young kids. And Here's the thing. Here's the thing that's kind of funny. Between the ages of about 2 to 4, there is something that goes on in our brains. Um, and you guys see this, when you think about it, we don't really think about it happening in our brains, but we see it out. Donna sees this with her preschool kids, and I know Anne has often helped Donna with the preschool kids. And one of the things that that they struggle with is when a child preschool starts at church at the age of 2. When a child turns 2 that year, they can start preschool. And Donna talks about the fact that very, very often with those 2-year-olds, there's this we call it sometimes separation anxiety, but the 2-year-olds are clingy, and they're often crying, and they they don't want to be dropped off. And so Donna and the preschool teachers downstairs are standing there, and of course these 2-year-olds, they have their arms wrapped around mommy's neck and they're screaming. And a lot of moms see this with their 2-year-olds in school too, and it is so traumatic, because mom is trying to drop a 2-year-old off, and maybe that 2-year-old went to daycare and loved it and had friends and no complaints. But now all of a sudden they're 2, and there's this new environment, and they're clingy and they're screaming, and sometimes they work themselves up to the point where they're sick. And of course, then mom is really distressed, and mom is crying, and mom is all kind of whacked out. And there is something about 2-year-olds that age, and it's happening in your brain. There's some really, really important stuff that's happening in your brains as you are. I'm going to talk about more. Maybe we will more in depth about this on Sunday, because it's just remarkable stuff. The way God has created us, that. You are in the process of that age of forming these really deep attachments to your parents. And the interesting thing is, I always was happy to go to school. I don't remember ever really, not that I like school a whole lot, but I don't remember ever being distressed about going to school until, gosh, what grade was it? Maybe 4th grade. My 4th grade teacher, we walked in, and I think she was at Muhlenberg. She had these open-toed sandals, and she got mad at somebody, and she kicked the metal trash can. Today, if a teacher did that, unfortunately, a teacher would probably be reprimanded and fired and spend 17 years in jail or whatever it is. But back in the day, I remember my 4th grade teacher, open-toed shoes. She got angry. She kicked the trash can across the room. And man, she put the fear of God in all of us. And we didn't mess around with that 4th grade teacher. Anyway, so by the time you are 4, morning, Marianne, by the time you're 4, a lot of those attachment with your mom has been solidified and formed. And so you get to 4-year-olds, and 4-year-olds often 4 to 5-ish, they can't wait to go to school. They have their new backpack all picked out a month ahead of time. And every time somebody comes over, they get out their backpack and say, look at the new backpack I got for school, and it's usually some favorite from maybe a TV show or maybe a book that they've read. And, 4-year-olds a week ahead of time will start saying to mommy, how many minutes till I go to school? I can't wait to go to school. How many days? And mommy says, oh gosh, you have 7 days. No. And then they can't wait to meet friends, and they come home from school talking about the friends that they meet. They can't wait to go back the next day to see their friends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's this remarkable thing that happens, generally speaking, between the age of 2 and 4, that you are growing these attachments. They're being solidified in your brain. Your brain is actually being rewired, and it's remarkable what is happening in your brain. And it's being rewired largely through the attachments, the connections that you're growing. Wow. Yeah, that is a scary thing. I agree, Estella, when you got somebody who is studying this neuroscience stuff, and then they're looking at you thinking, what's wrong with your brain? But so just fascinating stuff. And I'd love to have a conversation with Samantha, some of the stuff I'm reading right now. But here's what's going on. This is really a fascinating thing. Your brain in those years, it is literally being rewired. And I shouldn't say rewired. God is wiring it through attachments. And there are these neural pathways that are being formed, and your brain is literally being shaped as you develop these attachments, these connections to your parents. Now, obviously, some of you I know are thinking already about all that can go wrong, and it does go wrong. And a lot of human beings will suffer when there are not healthy parent-child relationships early on, and because our brain is often wired in wrong ways. And the good news is that our brain can be rewired, but a lot of that is developing very young. But here's the thing: what a child is learning roughly between the ages of 2 to 4, when the brain is being shaped and formed by those attachments to a mom and a dad. One of the things that they're learning is that that the world is a safe place, and when they learn that in a healthy way, there is this sense for a child that even if mom drops me off at a school, or dad drops me off, or dad puts me on the bus, whatever, by the time they're 4-ish, in a healthy brain, when there are these healthy relationships, they have learned that the world is a safe place because mom and dad say it is. And that happens in those early years. When you fall and you skin your knee and you're 2 years old, and mommy picks you up, and mommy says, oh, what happened to your knee? And mommy puts a Band-Aid on. Or, you're laying there, you're sick, and you're 2 years old and you're sick and you're throwing up, and daddy's there. It's like, I know you feel badly, but it's going to be okay. And with these words that you're hearing, and the physical attachment to your parents, your brain is being wired, and you're developing this healthy sense of the world. And it's remarkable how this happens in our brains. So by the time you're 4-ish, 4, 5-ish, you have this sense that because of your attachments, because of the love relationship, you could call it, because of the fact that your parents have provided for you kind of a safe place, you've learned that the world is safe. And what that does, ironically, is once you've learned the world is safe, it gives you the freedom to explore and to make new friendships. And you might be on easy when you're 4 years old and you walk into your new, or 5 years old, you walk into your new kindergarten class and you don't know anybody. You're a little bit on easy, but and there's some fear. However, that fear is overcome by the healthy attachments that you have in your brain. And this is all, I don't know if you call it unconscious or subconscious. I don't quite know how all that works. But in your brain, your brain is saying it's okay, because in your brain, there's this sense of mom and dad are there. Mom and dad are going to pick me up. They haven't abandoned me. And that security is part of what goes into this whole rewiring of your brain in those ages. So it's no surprise that 2-year-olds whose brain are not, not all of that is fully formed. 2-year-olds, even though they have heard their parents reassuringly, it's okay. Mommy's right here. Mommy's going to pick you up. They're still in the process of learning that and forming all that. And by the time they're 4 or 5 or whatever, often that's relatively shaped. So here's the thing, that to me, that is so significant about this, that that God has made us so that over a period of time, our brain is shaped and wired to feel that the world is a safe place and it's going to be okay. And that never changes. That growth never goes away. When you become a follower of Jesus, in many ways, and that's exactly, Pat, too. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier. We know that can go wrong, and it often does. And then as we age and as we start to, quote, mature, we're still dealing with that. A lot of kids have not learned to attach to another human being. We haven't learned to feel safe in our world because we have lacked that. We've missed that. And then, of course, we're playing catch up, and there's all kinds of consequences for us as we age. However, I want you to think about this as adults as well, that one of the things that we have to learn as an adult is that the world is a safe place to be. And what happens to us is that in many ways we unlearn that. I remember, I've told this story before. I remember being in a car, dad gum, 15 minutes. It's supposed to be about 7 minutes, according to my notes right here. I remember being in a car, radios in the back of my parents' Chevy, I think it was, and, back pre-seat belts, bouncing around with my sister. The radio was on, and there was a radio broadcast. I was a young kid, a radio broadcast about a hurricane and the fact that people had died. And I distinctly remember sobering up as a kid, sitting back there, an elementary school kid, and suddenly realizing that, there's some really bad things that happen in the world. And I suddenly realized that it's not an entirely safe place. And obviously, we're in the midst right now of what we're dealing with right now is that sense of our world is not a safe place. We think we're in control. Then all of a sudden, something happens to the whole world, and we realize we're not as in control as we want. But when you are a follower of Jesus, one of the things that we are in the process of learning is that the world is a safe place wherein we're in the care of our Father. It's interesting because the Bible talks about the fact that Jesus, in Hebrews, it says Jesus had to learn obedience. And we often don't think about the fact that Jesus had to learn things, but he did. Exactly what we're talking about, the fact that we have to learn to trust. Jesus had to learn the same thing. It doesn't mean that he learned it from a condition of being sinful, because we know that Scripture talks about the fact that Jesus was without sin. But Jesus had to still learn things. And one of the things that Jesus had to learn was that the world is a perfectly safe place to be when you're in the care of the Father. And, you think about, that does not mean, and I think what we confuse that. We think, well, if the world is safe, for us, that means that there should be no bad things that are allowed to happen. And that is not the world we live in. That's not the world that Jesus lived in either. When you think about the life that Jesus lived, Jesus was not immune from bad things happening to him. But what Jesus learned is the same thing that a child is learning from roughly 2 to 4 to 5-ish, somewhere in there. When a child is learning that he or she is attached safely to a parent, they are learning that the world is safe, and therefore it's okay to explore. It's okay to hop on your bike and ride around the neighborhood. It's okay to make friends, because the child is learning that I have a mom and a dad, and they're always there, and they're going to protect me. That's what we learn as adults as well. It's what Jesus learned, even as an adult, that in the care of the Father, the world's a perfectly safe place to be, not because we're immune to bad things happening, but that there is nothing that's going to separate us, even the worst of things. There's nothing that's going to separate us from the care of the Father. That's what Jesus learned. And that's one of the things that when you look at Jesus, it makes it so remarkable, this life that he lived. Here, the more I read about Jesus, the more I'm struck by how secure he was in himself. Never had to feel like he had to please people, never had to keep people happy. He could take criticism and not be rocked by it. He was freely willing to have conversations with anybody, without this sense of needing to name drop or try to impress somebody. He just lived securely in this world. And it's amazing to look at the life that Jesus lived. Then, of course, you get to the cross, which, when you think about the fact that Jesus was not immune to suffering, the fact that Jesus knew he was safe doesn't mean he was immune to suffering. You look at him walking into the cross, and he prayed that prayer. I got a little bird sitting on my window. Sorry, it's my ADD. Oh, look at the bird. What was I talking about? Oh, the cross. So Jesus, he prays in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before the cross. He prays 3 times. His prayers always amaze me. He's praying, Father, squirrel. He's praying, Father, if there's another way, can we find another way? Jesus was not immune to suffering. And yet by the end of the prayer, Jesus is saying, Father, if this is your will, we'll do it. he knows that even in the cross, that he is safe in the care of the Father, even though the cross was horrendous. And he was praying Psalm 22 on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? So this is the thing that Jesus learned. He learned the same thing that we learn 2 to 4-ish with our parents, that when we have this healthy attachment, we learn that the world is safe. And as adults, we never stop learning that. And for those of us who are followers of Jesus, this is a lesson that we have to learn, that when we're in the care of our Father, the world is a perfectly safe place to be. It does not mean that we're immune to suffering. We're going to suffer, we're going to hurt, bad things are going to happen to us. But even when the worst happens to us, God has not abandoned us, and we are never outside of the care of God. And, when I think about this, I think about the fact that, so this is not an instant lesson for 2-year-olds. 2-year-olds do not learn this overnight. They learn it over a process of years. The same thing is true for us. You and I are not going to learn this lesson overnight, that the world is a perfectly safe place to be if we're in the care of the Father. That's not something we learn instantly. We learn it over the process of years. But sadly, many of us have really never recognized, we've never really understood that this is what the process of growing to love God and growing to trust God is all about. It isn't instantaneous. It's this years-long, lifelong process of learning this. But that is, in fact, what we are learning. And it's a lesson that you and I really need to hang on to. Again, I go back to, I think often of Psalm 23, where, David wrote, even though he walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not be afraid, for you are with me, David said. Even in the worst of circumstances, we know that we're in the care of God, our Father. So I hope that is something that you guys can hang on to and understand that that's what's happening in our lives as followers of Jesus. That's what part of the maturity process is all about. The same thing that's happening from a child 2 to 4 that so many parents are seeing right now, sending their kids back to school and agonizing over the fact that their 2-year-old won't let go of their necks. But by the time they're 4 years old, or 5, somewhere in there, they are just dying to get back to school, and they can't wait to see their friends, et cetera, because in healthy ways, what they have learned by the time they're 5 is, I'm safe. This world is a safe place because I have my mommy and I have my daddy. And for those of us who are followers of Jesus, children of our Father, you and I are learning the same thing. That's the goal of discipleship. That even as big people, even in a world that throws horrific stuff to us, this world is a perfectly safe place to be, because we will never be separated from our Father. He will never abandon us. And even when the worst happens, he is there, even walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And we will wake up someday recognizing that the worst thing that happened to us turns out to be the best. That is what we cling to, that the world is safe. So, So you guys learned that last night, Ann, in the preschool lesson. So hang on to that truth. And for those of you who are parents who are sending kids back to school right now, it's a tough year to send kids back to school. But I think as a parent, I think one of the things that you need to know is that it is your presence that is reassuring our kids, even in the midst of what is an ugly time. And it's your attachment to your child that is going to make them recognize ultimately that this world's a safe place because they have mommy and they have daddy. And that's what we learn about our Father as well. So for those of you who have places to be 10 minutes ago, honestly, I looked at this and thought, 7 to 10 minutes. I don't know how I do this. So let me pray so that we can get on with our lives already. God, I want to pray for parents, moms and dads who and grandparents right now who are sending kids back to school. And I know that that looks so different. I know that there are some kids that are actually headed back to school, that they are showing up with their little lunch boxes and their hair slicked down and with new sneakers and new clothes. And it's exciting for them. And some of them are scared. God, but I pray for those parents who are doing that. I pray that you'd assure them. I pray that they would know that they have such a huge role to play in the lives of their kids. They don't have to get it right. They don't have to be perfect. But just the fact that they are present in the lives of their kids means so much. God, I know that for other parents, this school year is radically different. We're still struggling with what does it mean for sports. And there are some schools already that know that it's going to be entirely virtual, and parents are really struggling with how to make this work and looking for alternatives. God, we do need help. We need some assurance, and we need to be able to trust you in this. God, I also recognize, as we talked about, as Pat mentioned, that, and we think about the fact that there are so many kids in our world for whom this process will never be completed in a healthy way. That there's some parents, some kids who grow up without those healthy attachments. And God, you're the perfect Father, and you've organized this world so that even when the worst happens, it can be overcome in our lives. As a church, Father, I pray that we understand that we're in the process of often overcoming some of the hurt and harm that's done to us as human beings. I pray that you'd help us to be actively engaged in that as a church. But then, Father, I pray for all of us big people. I pray, God, that as right now we are in the midst of a world that is clearly not a safe place to be, pray, God, that we'll grow to understand that when we're in the presence, when we are in your family, when we're children of a perfect Father in heaven who has so much power and so much knowledge and so much love, I pray, God, that we'd find ourselves reassured with the confidence that even when the worst happens, God, that you still are present. You, God, we will never be ripped from your presence. And when the worst happens to us, God, we will wake up and realize that it was the very best. And you've welcomed us home. And God, as Scripture says, the suffering that we experience now is nothing compared to the glory that will be ours. Pray, God, that you'll help us to hang on to that. Pray, God, that you'll go with us today and that we be reminded of your presence every second of this day. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Alrighty, everybody. Yeah. So thank you all, guys. Hope you have a great day, and love you all and enjoy your Friday.